Hi, the following video has been created as an aid to those looking to apply microcement. Please note that this isn't considered a DIY application, and we recommend that you have previous experience or training before taking on a project with this product. Microcement is becoming more trendy with modern interiors. It's seamless and easy to live with, and for that reason, the market for it is increasing massively. Here, we're going to show you how to apply it. The primer used for the application of microcement will depend on where we are going to apply the product. The primer is different if the surface is porous or non-porous. Let's have a look at the tools we need. We're going to need a medium pile roller. You can use a smaller one if there are difficult to reach areas. We're also going to use a stirrer to mix it with water and a brush for cutting in. Atomo dilution is dependent on substrate porosity. If the substrate is non-porous, it should be keyed using an angle grinder fitted with a diamond blade first. Then, we should consider using Prolink primer instead. To test the absorption of Atomo, you can apply a test patch on a wall and leave it for half an hour to dry. If the wall goes matte, it means you've diluted it too much. And if it goes glossy, it means you haven't diluted it enough. Ideally, the surface should have a somewhat satin finish to it. Once our Atomo is mixed and ready to go, we can start our application. We're going to primer all the surface and then we're going to leave Atomo to dry. Depending on the room temperature, Atomo will generally dry in anywhere around 2 to 4 hours. Now that our Atomo is dry, we're going to get started with our first base coat and the mesh. We recommend that you have the mesh you're going to use already pre-cut to the size of the areas you're going to need. This will help you save a lot of time, and it will also help you to avoid running short when trying to fit the mesh into the base coat before it dries. In the way of tools, we're going to be using a mixer with a paddle, and we're also going to be using a flexible Venetian plastering spatula. This is essentially a mini trowel that will allow us to reach those difficult areas whilst keeping the job nice and tidy. We're also going to use an internal and external corner trowel. Whilst these are not essential, they do make it a lot easier to get those smooth finishes when tackling fiddly areas of the project. The choice of trowel for the application of the base coat is going to be very dependent on the experience and ability of the applicator. A larger trowel can cover a large area faster, but is also more difficult to control and requires more precision to maintain an even thickness on the coat being done. Because we're going to be doing a small area, we'll only be using the 240 trowel for this project. We wouldn't recommend anything smaller, only because it will take too long to complete the base coat. Now we can prepare our material. When complete, 25 kilo bag of base should be diluted with around 5 to 6 liters of water. It's recommended to start with a lower amount and add as required to achieve the right consistency. We also recommend only to mix what you think you'll be able to use within 1 hour. This is what the best workability is with the material. Remember to adjust the water accordingly. When mixing the material, we recommend that you add the water first. This will minimize the dust that flies out, but it will also prevent you from having any dry material at the bottom of the bucket. Once the material is mixed, make sure you are happy with the consistency before applying. It's always possible to adjust it by adding a little bit more powder or water. We are going to start by applying material on the external corners. This is where we're going to be applying all our beading. The idea is to do all the external corners first and set all of our beads down before proceeding with the application. Once we finish with all our beading, we can then start to have a look at the rest of the wall where we are going to apply our mesh. It's good practice to overlap the mesh with the beads. to ensure that we have a good anti-crack, especially in edges and corners. Make the mesh stick to interior corners as tightly as possible to make sure that we get a nice straight line, because once it dries, you won't be able to fix it. Be careful not to use the trowel or spatula too hard against the mesh, as you may end up cutting it, making it lose its purpose. It usually doesn't matter too much which area you do first, whether it's ceilings or walls. Just think about the access. Can you easily reach a certain part without damaging something you've already done? If the corners are giving you trouble, also consider using an interior trowel. This will help you to smooth them out nicely. When finished, we should hopefully end up with something looking a bit like this. Now we can start with our second base coat. First, let's make sure that the first coat is dry. Then we want to scrape off any raised bumps. We don't need to be too critical at this stage. Let's also remove the tape and apply fresh clean tape to avoid any chips. It's also important to brush away any debris. We want to have a nice clean surface on which to continue. Once we are happy with the surface, we can prepare the material for our next coat. By now you should have a good understanding of what to expect from the mixture. Remember that you can always adjust it depending on where you're going to be applying material. For example, you may want to have it slightly thicker when you're applying it on ceilings to prevent any dripping. Once we are finished with the second base coat, we want to remove all the tape while the coat is still wet. This is to avoid any chipping of the base coat or for the tape to get stuck. The coat should be dry fully in around 3 to 5 hours. Now we are going to begin our first decorative coat. This is the plaster that gives our finish the color, but also the one that is the key part of the application. It's where most of our work is going to be seen, and it's where our design skills are going to be put to the test. There's different types of applications that can be done. Here we're going to look at two popular applications using two different sets of tools. Before we start with the decorative coat, let's quickly go back to the base coat and finish off. Once the base coat is dry, you want to start by scraping the surface and removing any imperfections once again. We want a nice smooth finish to work on. Sand down any remaining rough areas using 80 grit sandpaper, and take special note of exterior and interior corners, as these were the most fiddly to do. Before beginning the decorative coat, we should have retaped the area, scraped and sanded all the surfaces, and also vacuumed the area to remove any dust. Once that's done, we can go on to the decorative coat. So let's have a look at the tools that we'll be using for this one. You probably see that a few of these tools are going to be the same as what we use on the base coat. The only thing that's really going to change is the main trowel that we use for applying the material. So much like the base coat, we're going to be using a Venetian plastering trowel for the application of the decorative coat. In particular, we'll be using the 240mm one. You'll probably notice that these are smaller than what we use for the base coat. Although we are going to be a bit slower, we want to have more control over the material. We're trying to achieve an artistic finish, and it's important that we're able to apply pressure in the right places. The plastic-based white trowel can also be used to achieve a different effect. We'll look at it in more detail later on in the video, but just keep it in mind, it's possible to achieve different finishes depending on the tool that's used. Once you've got your tool sorted, we can start to have a look at mixing our materials. We're going to be working with our standard kit size of 10 square meters. For this, you're going to receive two items for the decorative coat. The first one is a 15 kilo bucket of the plaster, which will come in the color that's been selected. In this case, we're using Birmingham. You'll also receive a 5 kilo bag of powder, which must be added to the Deco A in order to prepare the material for application. The ratio that we want to mix at is 3:1. If we know this ratio, we're able to prepare exactly the amount of material we need every time. We're going to prepare around half of the material for this part of the project because the area we're doing is quite small and we should be able to finish it within the hour. If you are going to be working with microcement often, we would recommend having a set of weighing scales. They're very useful when mixing part components that require specific ratios. These don't have to be expensive. A set of scales that can go up to 6 kilos with a gram of tolerance are usually enough. These will also be very useful when it comes to doing the protective coats. If there are 2 or more people working on the project, we recommend that one mixes the material as the other one adds the powder. This helps to reduce any dust that gets thrown up into the air. We recommend that you mix it for around 3 minutes and the material will stay good for about 2 hours after you've mixed it. If you're doing 2 coats, remember it's best to leave half of the material for the second coat and mix it later. You can also add 5% of water to the mixture if you find that it's a bit difficult to work with. We don't recommend going above that. Once the material is mixed, if you have any dry bits on the edge of the bucket, they can be removed and used for the first coat. We recommend that throughout the application you keep the edges of the bucket clean so no more material dries on the sides. This will make it especially difficult on the second coat, where it will be quite visible if you've used any dry material. Venetian plastering spatulas are very useful for this type of application. They're essentially very small trowels. They're flexible and can reach difficult areas. This makes them an excellent choice when doing the edges or going right up to the interior corners. You'll find that a combination of spatulas and interior and exterior corner trowels are very good for doing small fiddly areas. Our first coat of deco will generally dry up within 3 to 5 hours. Once this is finished, we can move on to our second coat. Now, as you applied the first coat, did you get a lot of material over the tape? If you did, we'd probably recommend removing the tape and retaping before we start off with the second coat. Once our material is mixed, we can move forward with our application. As mentioned before, there's 2 ways you can go about it. A stainless steel trowel, such as the one being used here, will discolor the plaster as pressure is applied. Most people tend to like this effect. It's very deliberate and it looks more natural. It should look something like this. If we want to avoid any trowel marks, we can also go for a smooth finish. With this one, we're applying the material using the same stainless steel trowel, but instead of burnishing, we're actually going to smooth it over with the plastic trowel. It can't compress as hard, but it does avoid marking the plaster, so you should get a nice smooth finish. This finish will also have a seamless uniform color. When doing the second coat, we want to make sure that all the edges are perfect. We recommend you start the application from the top with the ceiling and then work your way down gradually. When doing the walls, you should do walls 1, 3 and 5 and then come back to walls 2 and 4. This will stop you from interrupting the perfect edges you've just made. This is what our finished second coat should look like. Also, if you got any dry material on the edges like here, don't worry, we can sand it down afterwards. Now that we've finished with the second coat of deco, we can remove the tape and leave it to dry. It's advised that we give it around 12 hours. We want to make sure it's perfectly dry before we move forward onto the link. Before we start to apply link, we want to make sure that we sand the whole surface with 120 grit sandpaper and remove all the dust. Then we will retape. Link can be applied in a few different ways. We'll be focusing on the main technique, which is by using a mohair roller as well as a natural bristle brush for cutting in. It's also possible to use a tobacco sponge, although we won't be covering it in this video. We also recommend a stirrer for mixing the material and making sure that everything is in proportion. We would also recommend that you bring back those scales from the deco if you are going to be mixing different quantities. When mixing the link, there's 2 things we want to consider. We still want to mix only what we're going to use within 1 hour, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we can cover every continuous surface. For example, if you're doing 2 separate rooms, but they're going to take longer than 1 hour, we recommend you do 1 room and then prepare the material for the second room. If you're going to be doing one continuous large area that will take longer than 1 hour, we recommend that you have someone on hand to mix up more material for you whilst you're still applying. The end goal is not to have a gap between the applications, because leaving a dry edge can cause a permanent line within the finish. We are going to mix link A and B in a ratio of 2:1. With link, we'll only be doing one coat. So for 10 square meters, we're going to add 100 ml of link A and 50 ml of link B and 4 times the amount of water for 600 ml. If you are going to be adjusting the mixing quantities, make sure you add the relevant amount of water. And look at what your kit is for. If it's for 20 square meters, maybe you'll have double the link together, in which case you should be adding 1.2 liters of water. Do not underestimate the application of link. Although the material appears as just a simple clear liquid, it can heavily stain the surface. It's important that we always work on a wet edge, and if you are doing floors and walls, make sure you cover up surfaces and don't soak it too much to prevent any splashing. All of these things can leave stains that will not come off later on in the application. So remember, we're going to be using a crisscross technique and always work on a wet edge. Don't make any linear or repetitive movements, and when you cut in the edges, make sure you fill it immediately with the roller. Don't do your frame around the entire wall. Make sure you avoid any splashes as well. The link will need at least 6 hours to dry, but we recommend leaving it overnight if possible. Once we come back, we're going to be applying our top coat. Now, this is what's going to give the most protection to the application, and it's where you get to choose a matte, satin or gloss finish. We want to respect the application of top by giving it enough drying time and applying thin coats. This is going to give you the best resistance against water. Our final set of tools are pretty simple. We'll be using a foam roller for the application. Do bear in mind the size of the roller according to the area you're covering. As you know, we're doing a small area, so our rollers are quite small. And the bristle brush will help us to cut in once again. Similar to link, top also has two components. Top A and B have a mixing ratio of 3.33 to 1. So for 10 square meters, we're going to mix 1.25 liters of top A with 0.375 liters of top B. And we'll add water equivalent to the total volume of the mixture divided by 10, which will make it 163 ml. As with all the other coats, we're going to only mix what we can use within 1 hour. This is a very good tip. It's always better to do multiple thin coats than a single thick coat. 2 coats are standard application. If you have enough material left, we recommend doing even 3. It will improve the protection of the surface. We want to carry out a similar application with top as we did with link by using a random movement technique and cutting in where we are in order to avoid leaving any marks on the floor. Our final coat will be very straightforward. Mix a fresh batch of material and carry out the exact same application. Once top is finished, surfaces can handle light traffic after about 24 hours. They will be fully usable in 5 to 7 days, but please bear in mind that the maximum hardness will be achieved in around 21 days. We recommend you wait as close as possible before moving any furniture into the room. Our final application will look something like this. Very seamless and easy to live with. The surface should only be cleaned using soapy water. Cif can be used on occasion if tackling tough stains. Definitely never apply bleach on this type of surface. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any more questions or to book yourself on one of our Microcement courses. Although we've done our best to cover as much information in this video, there are many nuances and techniques that can be learned when carrying out these finishes. We've also only shown 2 possibilities of what can be done. Colors can also be combined and different textures can be achieved. We hope that you found this video useful and that you'll be able to use the techniques here in order to carry out a successful application of our Microcement product. Thank you very much.